So I want to thank you for taking the time to join this webinar, Data Corrections in Global HR and S3, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And with that, I give you Janna and Jackie.
Thank you, Keith. So we're going to be talking about data correction in GHR and S3 today. We're kind of looking at it as an end-to-end process. If you started out in GHR, it gets interfaced down to S3, but we're going to be talking about it from each side. So maybe you only have GHR or you only have S3. We're going to hit both sides, so it'll probably be relevant either way.
So how clean is your data, and why do you need it clean? A lot of you can think through various reports that you have out of either S3 or GHR. Some of the delivered reports maybe, like the turnover report or just modified list definitions that you've done. Usually are pretty aware of how data feeds to payroll, benefits, time, and expense. Feeds that you send to the vendor, you need your data clean for that. And then what's displaying on employee and manager space? How many workarounds do you have to get things to work? Oh, we have to jerry-rig this for payroll, or we have to jerry-rig and manually update this file and that goes to this benefits vendor. What we're going to show you today is a way to clean up your data so that it looks good for employee manager space, it runs right for payroll, it makes your benefit feed seamless coming out of the system, no manual updates or cleaning done to it, and makes you the winner, the queen, king of your domain, that you're the hero for your HR, finance, payroll group in terms of keeping your data clean.
Exactly. So just to start off on the S3 side, I want to hit a little bit of terminology and just kind of summarize what you would be doing if you're doing any data corrections in S3. So the first three lines we have up here are your main forms for data corrections within S3. We have the HR 54, that's the employee history table. So any action or just straight up update that was done to an employee, that's going to get collected on the HR 54 as long as you have it flagged for history on the HR 10. The personnel action history table, the PA 54, that's going to hold all of the personnel actions that have ever been taken on an employee, and you can update right from that screen. And then the PA52, this is, you probably think of this as the PA52.1. whatever. You probably think of this as your data entry for personal actions, but this is where you're doing a lot of your reversals and reprocessing. Drill around within S3, there's a drill around in both places, but they're kind of different. In S3, it's referencing the history tables that you can see displayed on the forms we have listed above. So it's referencing like payment history, employee history, personnel action history, all of that good stuff. And this is a lot of times when you're correcting data, you go into the drill around and make sure it looks okay, make sure it flows into the right order, and what you want to see is actually there. And then if you have GHR, the bottom section here, these screens are relevant to you when you're processing the interface. The first one is the LT11. We have listed the .1, but there's up to .6 or something for the employee, position, supervisor, job, interface, all of those. So that's the staging table when everything comes over from GHR. It sits on the LT11 table until it gets processed by either the LT101 or the LT11. That just processes the changes into, in our case for the employee, the HR11 record. And then in between there we have the LT22. This screen shows the delta, if you will, the changes that are coming out of GHR into S3, shows you what's actually going to be updated for the employee. And then the LT11.5, that's the employee user field staging table.
So on the GHR side, you have the audit log and the full audit log on pretty much every page in GHR. The audit log is going to be a little bit cleaner if there's been corrections or changes made. You're just going to see the final result there. If you want to see, oh, what rows were crossed out or what data was corrected through the audit update feature or audit create, you can go to the full audit log and it'll show you the full scope of who has touched what in that record. Effective dated requests is off of the async administrator menu. It's a different type of access you may or may not have as a generalist. But this is a critical place to be able to access if you have actions that are saved in the future but turn out to need to be canceled. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. Drill around in GHR is the place that you go to be able to do audit log updates or audit log creates. And you can also change a future effective date out of the drill around audit log stuff too. Re-entering the action with corrected data is not an intuitive process, but is partly how GHR works to clean up data, and we'll talk about that. Updating on the record first and then going in to correct the audit log, also not intuitive, but also a tricky process for getting things clean for employee and manager space. Re-entering the previous action to cancel out or reverse an action that was saved in error. Also not an intuitive action to take, but another part of how things work in GHR. And finally, looking at the employee export records and what's getting sent over to S3 in the interface, and the cross-reference tables we mentioned here. We don't go through them in our slides, but that's one thing to check. If your data isn't interfacing properly over to S3 like you're expecting it, you may not have things mapped out correctly in the cross-reference tables.
Yeah, if you're expecting to see an action come over and it just comes over as a straight update, or if you're expecting to see a reason come over and it doesn't come over at all, it's probably an issue with the cross-reference table.
Yeah. So who does what first? In some cases, you're going to want to go to S3 first and clean up the data there before you do anything else in GHR. Other times, you're going to want to look at the GHR and clean it up first there. So we're going to take you through in each sequence what we recommend as the preferred order. There's also some security roles that you're going to need in GHR to be able to do everything that we talk about here. If you've got the administrator role, that's fine. You're probably set. If you just have a generalist role, you may need additional process server or async administrator access added in. The history correction role has to be granted to you to be able to do the audit log updates and creates that we're going to show you. In S3, the access is different because it's more kind of custom built from the ground up. There aren't really any roles that we can recommend that you have. So that would be a different story to come talk to us about if you have questions.
Yeah. So today we've broken it down into the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're going to start off with the good. So these are the easiest scenarios to fix. We just have a few examples up here. So the first one is action request has been entered, but it hasn't been approved yet. So maybe I put in a pay rate increase for Janna, but it hasn't gone through the approval steps. The next one is it has actually been approved, but with a future effective date, so it hasn't taken effect yet. And then the last one we have is the effective date or the reason code has needs a correction after it's been processed. All right, so the first one, action request has been entered but not approved yet. So there's two ways that we can do this. The first way is to withdraw it within the action requests or cancel it within the work units. So it's important to know, I think the screenshot we actually have here is demoing to cancel it within the work units. But we wanted to point this out because if you do this, although it works great, it kind of leaves an orphaned action request record in showing that an action should have taken place, but the work unit totally disappears for it. So you kind of can't trace it back to what the work unit or what work unit this action request was linked to. So we say, you know, it'll work both ways if you cancel it in the work unit or if you withdraw it from the request, but we probably both recommend that you go and do it through action request so that you don't get that orphaned work unit here.
Future effective date. So it's been saved and then somebody's run to your desk and said, oh my gosh, this shouldn't have been approved, this is wrong. As long as it's still in the future, you can go out to this effective dated request part of the async administrator area and find it and just simply right click and select cancel on it. And you'll see in the audit logs, I don't think we did one. Oh yeah, no, you'll see in the audit logs that it's been crossed out even though it's still in the future. And once you get past that, it'll remain crossed out, but it won't say future beside it anymore. But wait, there's more. You still, because it's been saved, depending on how your interface is set up, but most likely than not, it's been interfaced over to S3, and you have a future effective dated LT11 record sitting out there. So you're going to want to go into the LT11 and skip that record to make sure that that doesn't get processed into the employee's record in S3.
Yeah, and just to point out, the audit log Janna is mentioning over here, this is again the full audit log. That's the one that's going to show everything, whether it's crossouts or updates in italics. If you want to just see a clean version of it, that's just the regular audit log. This one is the full audit log. Okay, so if you need to, you can also cancel from drill around. So you would open up the audit log list. So you'd go into the employee, whether it's the resource itself or if you're on their work assignment for maybe a pay change. You'd actually go into the audit log, find that future record and hit cancel. And you can see again here, we have a strike through for that. In this case, it was a terminate action that we've canceled.
So again, also from the same navigation, so you're in the employee or the work assignment record, you go to drill around audit log. You also have this option to change the effective date here. And what we wanted to point out was that on the employee export records, the system knows that this was some sort of audit update or creation, so it actually defaults as not applicable. And that's kind of your cue to go over to S3 and make the same effective date update to a future effective dated LT11 record there before it gets processed in.
Yeah, if it's a not applicable status in the export, it means the interface is not going to do anything with it. If it's in a not processed status, that's when the interface pushes it over. But if it's not applicable, like you're saying, you have to go into S3 and make the appropriate updates there. All right, so another one here, effective date or reason needs correction, and this has happened in the past. So again, back to our audit log here. So we've drilled around into the work assignment for the employee, gone to the audit log. You select the row in question, the row you want to update, go to your actions and hit audit update. And then you can see I have a few things here that it's allowing me to update. It doesn't allow me to update everything that happened on the action, but I can actually update the effective date right here. So you can hit that and hit save. And then I think we have another scenario for the reason. Or I'm sorry, real quick. This is showing the audit update for the effective date. So you can see Janna actually did this one. It's showing italicized the correction here in reference to the row above it. So it's showing that there was a correction taken for this update in the past.
And then here's the contrast with just the regular audit log. You don't see any reference at all to that correction.
Yeah.
So it's a little cleaner for somebody just wanting to see the regular history.
Yeah, exactly. But it has the correct history in the regular audit log and
Yeah.
all kind of combined in there.
And then correcting a past reason code, again in the audit logs. This was just trying to show you a past effective dated correction, just another screenshot here. So we've got prior certifications, what was put in originally. I'm correcting it to certification. And again, in the regular audit log, you just see certification. So it kind of truncates the records and makes it cleaner.
We're going to jump real quick to S3 to show you how to do these same two actions in S3. So correcting a past effective date in S3. What you want to do is navigate to your PA52, pull up that employee, that effective date, and that action that was already taken on them, as well as that original effective date that's wrong. And you go to your special processing tab and select the process type of change effective date. You can't see it here, but there's also an option for new effective date. So when you, whichever effective date is the correct one, you would put that in that box and then use the add to actually add that new record in. You probably want to do it as immediate, which is an option available in the main tab. And then as far as correcting a past reason code in S3, you want to use your PA54 screen. So again, this holds all of the actions that have been taken on an employee. Whether they've come from GHR or whether they were entered directly into S3. And you can see up here, I have my reason code. If I want to change it, I put a new one right in there and hit change. My response will be something like change complete continue, only header updated, because you do also have the option to update the rows beneath it here.
All right. Woo! So now we're going to start getting into some of the messier, trickier ones that we hope will shed some light and really help you out here. The bad, we're going to take a look at an action that was saved and the effective date is in the past, and there's a data element like a pay rate that needs to be corrected, or saved and the effective date is today's date.
So this is one way you can do it. It's not the way we totally recommend it, but we want to show it to you to explain why we don't recommend it and what it's going to look like in case this is the way that you've done it or this is the way you had to do it. So this first one is correcting a pay rate. You're entering a new action by correcting that pay rate. So in our scenario here, I know this is probably too small to see, but what we've done is we moved someone from, for example, from $10 an hour to $15 an hour, and then we decided, oh, really, they should have been $12 an hour, so we want to back it back down. So if you do enter a second action, we're showing here, you're going to see both of those change pay rates in the audit log. Not only the full audit log, but also the regular audit log. So that's kind of, it can get confusing. A couple years have passed, you go back and you're saying, oh, why was this, why did this happen? You can enter a comment and you can enter a reason code, but it's not the cleanest way to do it. what else do we have here? It's also going to have 2 export records. So your first pay change is going to go over to S3, and your second pay change is going to go over to S3 too. And then in the pay rate history, again, 2 different pay change actions here. And you can probably live with that as an analyst on the back end. You can look at the comments, you can figure out what happened from the reason code maybe. But the one thing you want to look out for is this is a view from the manager space. You can see the pay rate changes have taken this guy up, and then it kind of went back down again when we did the correction. So this is the history that the manager is seeing that's probably not so good. You don't want them to see this mistake happening here.
As well as the employee.
Yeah,
You'll really
exactly.
start getting a lot of questions about, well, what happened?
Yeah.
Why don't I have the higher rate? So if this is purely an administrative issue, you really don't want to go this way. In the case of maybe the rates going up again, and you will also know when you trigger another action request, you're triggering all the workflow
Yes.
associated emails and approvals with it. So if you want that, you want it for some reason to go through approval all over again, then that would be the route you would go. But if you don't need it, if it's something you're correcting, this is less than desirable.
Yeah. And we have up here, I know it's probably hard to read, but we can see he went from $100 an hour to $115 and then $120, or $120 and then $115. So it's, it's not super clean is what we're getting at here. And then when it makes it over to S3, this is the pay history, I believe. It's showing both of those records again. So if you can stop it before it makes it to S3, then you only have the problem in GHR, but still it's just not the cleanest way to do that. So Janna is going to take us through the recommended way.
Yep. And actually, before we do what I really recommend, this is kind of another way you might think like, oh, I'm going to go into the audit log and I'm going to do an audit create, because audit create opens up every row or every field in that row for you to make changes to. So you go in, you put your new change rate, and then you try to save it, and you get this first error message that says, oh, you need an effective date through. So what that's telling you is this audit create function can only be used for an action that's embedded in other actions. It's not something you can use for the most current row, because what would you do for the effective date through? Like 2025, and then you'd have to go back and correct that when the next action came through for the employee. So difference between audit create versus audit update. So tricky little way that we figured out to do this was you go and you make an update to the work assignment with that corrected pay rate. Then you can go into the audit entry, and lo and behold, where all these fields normally are not editable, just the pay rate is now editable in the audit log. And so what you see on the full audit log is it's let me do an audit update to change that compensation to the correct salaried amount. And where this really turns out nicely is before you make that audit log update, if you just made the update to the pay rate, in the employee and manager space history, you'd have these 2 rows here that would have, one rate and then another rate at the same date, but with no reason code. So again, that's going to trigger questions from the employee, questions from the manager that you don't really want to deal with. Once you do that update to the audit log row, it truncates. It's like magic. It truncates the 2 rows just down to 1 with the corrected pay rate. So gone are all the questions and confusion around what was probably just an administrative error. The big lesson I learned one year, we used rounding, and what we uploaded was not correct because of somebody else's rounding, and then we uploaded to get the correct rates in, and we just had questions out the wazoo about why am I paying? Some people it was off by a penny, some it was like $10.
Wow.
So if you know how to do this, you can avoid that kind of confusion and questions coming into the HR department, or comp for that matter. And then correcting the pay rate in the GHR export. The export, again, knows what's an audit update, so it doesn't process it. So that first update I did to the pay rate is going to process, but that second change that I made on the audit log just to the pay rate field it's going to hang out here and not processed. We're thinking we need to actually log a ticket about this because we think it should be not applicable.
Right. But the thing is, if you right click it, it won't let you export it over. Other not processed records will let you export over, but it doesn't even give you that option. So the system knows to not let it go over, but like you're saying, it might be a bug that should actually say not applicable.
Correct. Right.
Okay, so then on the S3 side, we're following the same action that Janna has corrected over to S3. So because of it's just an update, this is the LT11, we can see there's no reason code coming in here because it was just an update to the record. But once the LT111 or 101 is run, the correct rate is coming in on the HR11. So beautiful, all fixed, much better. If you do need to correct, this is the drill around for the employee. So you can see it's combined into the one record. It's all cleaned up. You don't have to worry about other questions coming from S3.
You do see on the salary history, so on the personnel action history, there's no second row without a reason code. Well, you never have a row without a reason code there. So you just have the one row, but it has the corrected pay rate in it. In the salary history, though, you do see kind of an audit function that, it was put in twice and changed on the same date.
So a couple things to think about with your interface timing and also your LT11 timing. If something, like I think we touched on this a little bit before, but if something has been put in and the interface has not been run yet, if you don't have it set to send every single record over as soon as it's complete, stop the export record. Go into the export table and you can actually switch it from not processed to not applicable. Or user field error, any of the errors won't go over either, but not applicable is the best one to use. If it has been run, go over to your LT11 before the LT111 is scheduled to run and skip the record. So you can come here to the status and set it to skipped. You can also delete your LT11 records. I know clients who just skip it, only skip it. I also know clients who delete. I haven't figured out which one I prefer. I think I might prefer delete, but either way, you can always resend an LT11 record over from your export table. So deleting is not a huge deal, because you can always send it back over if you need to reprocess it. And then if the 101 or 111 has been run, you will need to reverse the action. So we'll talk about that in a little bit.
And if the action's been saved and the effective date is today, you gotta wait till tomorrow. So GHR will only let you change a future effective date to another future effective date or a past effective date to another past effective date. So maybe it's effective today and it's really supposed to be effective in 5 days. I used to have to put Outlook calendar reminders in my calendar, like go fix this record on this day because I'm finally up to this future effective date being in the past, so I could correct to a past effective date.
It's a little tricky, but
it is. It's again not super intuitive, but it's the way the system works. So there we go. All right, so now we're getting into some of the ugly ones. How do you reverse something that's been entered and clean it up in S3 in GHR? So a scenario we've been running into at several clients is somebody says they're leaving, they're terminating, and then oops, it turns out they're staying, and we need to transfer them, or we just need to reverse out the term row because they're not really going right now.
So what you do is you want to do your last in has to be your first out. So the last action that was processed, maybe they have already gone through their term pending and their term final. You want to get all of that out of S3 first before you bring back that new transfer record from GHR. So these are screenshots showing you how to reverse out an action from the PA52. So usually run it as immediate. On the special processing tab, you want to use a process typo 4 to reverse the action. And then your history correction method, you have a few options here. You have the delete the records or move to history error. I go back and forth depending on what you're reversing. You could use either. Delete records is going to get it out of there entirely. Moving it to history error is going to move it out of the immediate view of your drill around, but still make it available if you do need to ever discover it there. I often say that if it's a complete mistake, like in this scenario that we're talking about, you just want to delete it because it shouldn't have been there in the first place. If there's more to the story, you might want to move it to history error so that it's discoverable in the future. And then the action number, this is actually going to reference what which action it is that was taken on that person for that effective date. So maybe there are 2 terms in one day, then you'd have an action number 1 and an action number 2. If you're not sure, you can use the search box and it'll open up a drop down and show you which action you need to select, basically. And then to reverse the action, you go to your special actions and do the reverse action. Here, it'll default the values onto your selected items 1, 2, and 3 tabs. You review them, hit add again. It'll probably warn you that it's going to be immediate, and then you hit add again, and finally it's reversed. There are some errors that show up when you're reversing an action. I know I just made it sound really easy. You can get all sorts of different errors as you're trying to reverse this. We do have a couple slides at the end where I talk about our most common errors. And so we'll talk about those and see how we can actually work through those.
So you might think, okay, the person's really transferring and they're transferring before the effective date of the termination. So can't I just enter a transfer row? And would that cross out that termination row? Because I'm kind of telling the system like, hey, transfer them, don't term them. So I tried that, and the system's actually smart enough that it says, oh, you know what, the work assignment is inactive for this employee. So this transfer isn't going to work even though it's got an effective date on it. So here's where the kind of counterintuitive process comes into play. This is where you want to actually re-enter the previous action request. And in doing so, you're telling the system reset to what the data was before this term row was put in. So it looks a little messy in the audit log. You've got 2 transfer rows here over a promotion. So a promotion row went in, and then oops, wrong person. I had a typo in the employee ID number. So I need to reverse that out. I've got to enter the exact same transfer action, same effective date, same position, same salary, same everything. And when you do a compare, I have a later slide, you'll see these 2 transfer rows are exactly the same data except for the actor and the time that it was put in. What's nice about this is even though there's 2 on your audit log, from an employee perspective, they're only seeing the 1 transfer row. So the system's smart enough for the employee and manager space view to truncate those 2 just down to 1, so you don't get questions about that. So you've canceled out the termination. You will see, here's an example of an actual term canceled. We had to actually enter the rehire action again. And here's my compare log where you're seeing the only difference between these 2 rehire rows is the date it was done and who did it, kind of thing. Otherwise, the data is exactly the same. So if you don't have the data be exactly the same, then you are at a risk for 2 rows displaying on the manager and employee record, because then it thinks, oh, it needs to show
An actual change.
Yeah, a change to the record.
So rehire, are we transferring or rehiring? So if the record makes it all the way down to S3, you are actually going to have to go into there and skip the record again on the LT11 if it's made it down there and the LT111 hasn't run yet. So this is a screenshot of the employee export port showing that it has processed. So we come into the LT11 and set this to skipped, hit our change button, and then it won't get processed through the LT.
This is more if you have it set to immediately exporting.
Yeah.
Some clients will have the export set for certain times out of the day, so it's easier to go in and catch that.
Yeah, before it comes over.
Yeah.
And then if it does make it all the way to S3, again, you want to do these reverse action steps to make sure it comes out of S3, and then you can send the correct data back from GHR.
So now you've crossed out that term row. Now you can enter that transfer row into GHR. You don't get the error message about the work assignment being inactive. It gets exported. I think if you go to the next slide, it gets, oh no, it does get exported into the LT11, and when it runs, it gets loaded, and it looks seamless on the S3 side that the employee just was transferred instead of terminated.
Yep. So do we have a question?
We do. In the first not recommended example, how could you remove the incorrect pay rate if you already have this record in the employee's record?
I guess we need to know if they mean GHR or S3. But let's hit them both. So here's our not recommended record method where we're entering a second action over top. And do you want to walk us through the GHR way to?
Yeah, can you back up to the very first recommend one more. So I think what you're saying is you've already done this. You already put in a second change pay rate row. So now you've got 2. The amounts are different. They're both showing in employee and manager space. They're both here on the in the audit log. So to cross out, remember to cross out a row, you have to re-enter the previous transaction. So you're going to have to enter a third change pay rate row with the original amount and get this crossed out first. And
test
then
it first.
Yeah, I mean,
try it and test.
All of this, yeah, do in your test environment
Yeah.
first. There's version variation sometimes. Like we swear we used to be able to enter a transfer and it crossed out the term row. I don't know how many versions ago, but
Yeah.
the ones we're working in now don't do that. So depending, how old or how new you are, there may be slight variations. They're constantly trying to improve this functionality. And shout out to version like 11.23. They're letting you put historical records and correct historical records more easily. So we're all super excited to get into that. So once you've re-entered that previous change rate, you would then put in an update row for the right amount and go into the audit log and merge like we show you later on. Good question.
Okay. One more. GHR is GHR, an employee is terminated in both GHR and S3, but now has to be transferred.
Yeah, so we're going to start in S3 for that one. Remember, last in, first out. So the last action in is the term in S3. So we want to go into the PA52 in S3, reverse that term action out of the PA52. And we don't have to worry about the LT11 because the LT11 is already processed, so it won't attempt to process again. And then back to GHR, we would enter,
The previous action. Yeah,
enter the previous action.
I wonder when that came in, because that's the exact scenario we showed, is to get it out of GHR, you have to re-enter the
Here we go.
previous action request.
Yep. So here's your reversal.
There's yours.
And then
You can't just transfer.
yeah,
That's not
we
going to
have
work.
to re-enter the previous action to cross out the termination. This is if it made it over.
Yeah.
And then you would enter the transfer after it's all clean in both places.
Have that go through.
Any more questions for now?
Nope.
All right. So just a few more slides here. Here are my S3 error messages. The first one is cannot reverse, later history exists for employee. So what this means is that you're attempting to reverse an action that has come in where there's actions after it. So you would need to actually, again, do that last in, first out. So you go and get the latest action, even if it has nothing to do with the process that you're trying to fix. You need to reverse that, then reverse the next one until you get down to the action that you need. And then blank, whatever the data item is in history, but not on action. So this means that if you're reversing an action, there is a data item that was changed when this action was processed, whether it was part of the whole update or whether it was done separately on the HR11 by itself, and an action was also processed that day and it got merged into the same history record, but it's not included on the action. So it's not on that PA50 where you go and select the items for that action. It wasn't added there. So you have two options. You can go to the PA54 and remove that data item from the personnel action record. I know I'm saying that it wasn't on it there, or it wasn't on it when it was originally processed, but it will show up on your PA54. So you would add a line item or an FC for delete and then hit change at the top and it'll remove that row from your PA54. If you do that, that will allow you to reverse the PA52. Your other option, if you're going to be running into this a lot, if you're reversing a lot of these same kinds of actions and there's a field that you didn't used to update via action, but now you do, your other option is to actually go to the PA50 and add that data item to the action so that you can continuously reverse it and include that item in it. Cannot reverse pending history corrections exist. So this means that your PA 113 needs some attention. You should be running this regularly. We have a ton of clients who don't run it regularly. So check it out. Don't run it in update. First, run it in non-update, in test, and check it out, see what's in there. But you can also use the PA 55 to kind of manage some of the records that are getting sucked into the PA 113. So if you want to remove some things that you don't want to be updated, check out the PA 55. Cannot reverse, no prior history for assignment date or no prior history for whatever. The action is actually looking for a prior value to revert it to when you're reversing that action. The way I usually get around this is I use the HR 54 to enter a line item for a prior assignment date, even if it's a fake date. You can make it as real as possible, use whatever date makes sense for the employee, and then it'll allow you to reverse the action. Once you've put in the correct actions or gotten it cleaned up the way you need it to be, you can come back to the HR 54 and delete out that line item so it's not like fake data in on your employee. All right, history correction must equal 1. Pending corrections exist. So 2 options here. You can either use that PA 113 to clean out any pending history corrections, or just change your history correction method to 1, like it's asking you to. And 1 is history errors, not delete. All right, action is being reversed, values cannot be changed. This means you reversed your action and then you went into your selected items 1, 2, or 3 tab and you changed something to try to get it to be what you wanted it to actually be. You can't do that. You have to go with what it's being reversed to. You can't mess with it once you reverse it. Then you add it and it'll be reversed, and then you can try to get your correct data back in there. And then last one here, warning, later history errors exist, review reversed values. This will actually let you process, it's just a warning, it'll let you process it through, but I do want to note that you might want to go in and actually check out what those later history errors are, just in case there's going to be some discrepancies in your data. And now, since you guys sat through all of that, we're going to reward you with a deliverable that's going to get sent out with this webinar that kind of talks about these error messages as well as a few others, and every scenario we just talked through with screenshots and text and examples, so you guys get to reference that if you ever need to. If you have any more questions, we'd love to take them, or if you have any specific complicated ones, we'd love to hear them via email, or right now even if you want to test us.
Do have a couple. What if you hire someone in error and need to remove from the system?
So that's something we didn't get into in this, but that's a great, by the way, besides this fantastic guide that Jackie's put together that you'll get, wait, there's more. We're going to be doing a blog posting, and we'll start with the scenarios we've outlined in this presentation, but then as we get new ones in from people, or we have new ones, others we think of, we'll add to future blog postings. And so this is an excellent one. When you have a record set up, you have to clear out certain data elements before it will let you terminate. And you have to, so if there's a course that's been assigned to them, that has to be deleted first. If there's a social security number, that has to be deleted. And then the work assignment has to be made inactive, and then you can delete the work assignment. And then finally, you can delete the employee record. And by the way, the data's never really deleted. It's all there. It's just the delete flag.
This is the GHR side, by the way.
I'm sorry. Yeah, for the GHR. So the data's all really there. So if you deleted all that in error, somebody could go in and reset the delete flag, and the data would kind of magically reappear.
Yeah.
So that's the GHR side. On the S3 side,
we would also probably recommend the delete. I've also seen where you just term them the same day and you use a reason code of no-show or error or correction, you know. So either delete or term with the same effective date.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Some organizations like to keep track of no-shows because they want to make sure they never hire them again and they're in the system, or they have a turnover rate that they want to know how many of the people hired and said they were coming actually don't show up for recruiting purposes.
Okay. What if you hire someone? Nope. Excuse me. When the termination has already been processed in GHR, the record will be inactive.
Correct.
When we enter the transfer, will it reactivate the employee record?
No, and that's what we were showing you. We feel like in an older version, I feel like I've been working this product for 8 years now, and I feel like at one point I could just put a transfer in and it would reactivate it. But up on later versions of 10.2 and 11, you have to first go in and reverse that termination by re-entering the previous transaction, whatever that was, before you can put that transfer in.
And I have tested recently on these newer versions, something else you can do is before you enter the transfer, you can go right to the work assignment and reactivate it there, and then enter the transfer, and it'll allow you to do it because your work assignment is now active, but it still doesn't cross out that termination. So just be aware of that. It gets it fixed, but you still have that. Even in the full audit log, it's going to show that the term actually happened and then your transfer happened. So just something to be aware of. Again, because of these version differences that we've seen, depending on what version you're on, you might want to just test both scenarios out and see which one works best for you.
Okay, and one last one, unless more come in. How do you reset the delete flag in GHR?
I knew somebody was going to ask that because I threw that out. So used to work with an on-premise version, had a good programmer that knew how to kind of go in a backdoor and wipe out that delete flag. I'm not sure in the cloud suite Do you log a ticket with Infor
We're
and
not
ask
sure.
them?
It's a technical, your
Yeah.
IT side or Infor would maybe have to do it. Neither of us can really tell you exactly how you do it, but there is a delete flag that is resettable. So, sorry.
That's all we have.
That's all we have. I want to thank
Fantastic.
everyone for taking the time to attend.